Hey loves, my name is Amber, welcome to my channel, and today we're going to be discussing Campfire Confessions by Kristine Ochu. As a brief disclaimer, this video is not monetarily sponsored in any way. However, I did receive the book from the Books Forward program in order to review and feature on my social channels. As a brief content warning, there are mentions and instances of substance abuse, overdose, suicide, attempted drugging, and sexual assault. That one we'll talk more about because contingencies. And there are also a lot of sexual elements to the book, which isn't a bad thing, it's just not everybody's cup of tea. So if that's a particular aversion that you have, you may want to avoid this particular book. So the book follows three childhood best friends who are now adults. Annie, who is kind of the primary reason for the events of the book. She's this mom of four boys, a pastor's wife. You know, she does it all. She's got the boys, she's got the housewife duties, she does everything with the church. Just so much on her plate, and happens to have a bit of a pill problem. And I say that kind of hesitantly because, like, technically they are prescribed antidepressants, but she pops them like candy, so it's a thing. We have Jo, who's a mom of two girls and is currently separated from her husband because she's in AA as a recovering alcoholic. And then we have Sandra, who married a man nearly twice her age, who is very horny in a now sexless relationship. So we have these three childhood best friends who don't talk so much anymore. They grew up, they got older, some of them became parents, some of them moved out of their small hometown. You know, they've got their life going on. They're still in contact on occasion, but for the most part, they're out of touch. Until Annie happens to have an overdose episode. Accidental, but it happens, and obviously scares the other two into coming back and having this, you know, dream camping trip to catch up that they've been talking about for a while and just never ended up doing, to try and get the full truth out of Annie. And then we also end up getting the truth about some of the different elements of Jo and Sandra's lives as well, because there's tea. You know, Annie, obviously, you know, she has a little bit of an issue with pills. She's taking antidepressants and is very, very embarrassed about it, but is also very reliant on them and is over abusing them because she's lost herself, just doesn't know who she is anymore other than being the pastor's wife and a mom. We've got Jo, who's like separated from her husband and isn't entirely sure if she wants to be or not, even though it was her decision. She can't make up her mind on if she wants like a fresh start or if she's still in love with him. And then we have Sandra, who's arguably in the messiest kind of situation of all. So she's in this sexless relationship and is very, very unhappy when she meets this other guy who she forms like a business relationship with to begin with, but then he ends up taking advantage of her loneliness, except it was all a ploy and they photographed it, and now this couple is trying to extort Sandra for like $2 million, and she has to try and figure out how to come up with the money so she doesn't have to divorce her husband, because she's not sure if she wants to do that or not. And that's where everyone's at when Annie has her overdose. So they all meet back up in their hometown, which is just a very, very small town. Everybody knows everybody. Everybody's all up in each other's business. And they go on this camping trip. And this camping trip, let's just say it goes really well and also really poorly. Like, the logistics of the trip itself are really, really bad. Like, everything that can go wrong goes wrong. But everybody has these kind of, like, emotional and spiritual developments and revelations. So, you know, they kind of get what they need out of it. And, you know, they all have their confessions around the campfire and reconnect with each other as only childhood friends who are coming back together can. I guess. I don't know. I didn't personally see the depth of the relationships with each other, and I would have liked to have seen a lot more intimacy with each other and a lot more acting like they actually like each other, because I feel like a lot of their dynamic was kind of just like making fun of each other, which can definitely absolutely be fun in a playful way. I would 100% be a hypocrite if I said that wasn't my dynamic with my friends. but we got a little bit too much of that and just not any true emotional depth behind it to really get the sense that they are these childhood best friends who've deeply missed each other. I'd say the ideal kind of audience for this book would definitely be like horny moms and like married middle-aged women. Is definitely the kind of vibe that it seems to cater to, which is fine. I am going to say right here, like, I don't think it was a bad book. It just certainly was not the book for me, because the description of it was, I don't want to say it was misleading, because it wasn't. I just definitely got an entirely different vibe than what it ended up being. When I was given the option of whether or not I wanted to review this, I definitely, you know, pretty much the main description of it was that, like, they're these childhood best friends who are reconnecting and their secrets and a camping trip. And probably because I've been reading so much horror lately, my brain definitely led to, like, murder or, like, some deep, dark, like, haunting kind of secret. So I was very, very excited until I read it and realized that I completely got the vibe wrong. It was definitely, I feel like, meant for a much different demographic than I fall into. But the writing itself was fine. Like, you're definitely able to read it very, very easily and follow along really well. And for the most part, know exactly what is going on and visualize things. There are definitely a few points throughout the book where I tried rereading because I just wasn't getting what they were trying to show. And I think that had a lot to do with the fact that we got a lot more telling instead of showing within the book. So they tell us so much information and we hear a lot of stuff. We just don't get to visualize it as much or see it coming together as much as I personally would have liked, particularly on the emotional points. Like, for example, I think that this book could have done really, really well as like a Lifetime style drama, but also like wholesome / comedy kind of show. But if they were to adapt it into a film medium, they would have to do a lot of work simply because they do so much telling instead of showing, and unless you want to directly go with the concept of having like a direct narrator throughout the entire thing, you'd have to find a lot of ways to visually show different elements. But I do think that that would be a huge benefit to the storyline, and I think that that's something that it could really use. So I wouldn't be opposed to seeing this turned into a film adaptation at all. I think the book could have been a lot better had they expanded on it a little bit. What we get is fine, but we really don't have enough time to go into any full emotional development and the intricacies of the emotions. And I think that also has a lot to do with them telling us instead of showing us. So instead of seeing it develop and build up, we're kind of just directly told. I do think that the overall point of the book was very, very wholesome, and that I do think that there is a lot that certain people could get out of it. It just wasn't necessarily done in a way that I felt particularly relatable or beneficial. There is a lot of spirituality within the book that I think a lot of people would really, really enjoy. Some of it involving God in a more like Christian sense, and some of it definitely more in a natural sense. It didn't feel entirely genuine, to myself at least. It did vaguely feel a little bit whitewashed, and I can't explicitly explain why, other than it was kind of just the vibe. We definitely got very much like, you know, naturalist, spiritual, like Instagram holistic yoga mom type vibes from it, which isn't necessarily a bad thing. It just felt a little stereotypical and a little bit more surface level. Like, it didn't feel as genuine as I think the author intended it to. You know, it very much like weekend retreat kind of vibes and language, which is not necessarily a bad thing, and there's definitely the audience and the benefit that can come from that. It just wasn't for me. It also feels like a little bit subtly misogynistic at times, and just a little bit like very patriarchal, but subtly, and not in an entirely damaging way. except for in the fact of how, like, the women kind of thought of themselves. You know, they were definitely, you know, they all had so much pressure on them to, like, be these perfect wives and moms and to never show any emotion or breakdowns or anything like that. And they were also very, very down on themselves, you know, with their own physical body image and things like that, you know, because they're old, you know, they're moms, they're middle-aged women, you know, they don't look the same as they did when they were teenagers, which is absolutely natural. But it would have been nice to have seen them be a little bit nicer to themselves, or, you know, for there to have, like, been a point behind that. Like, I don't know, it kind of felt included because it was like, this is how middle-aged women talk. Oh my god, okay. And then there's the logistics of this camping trip that gets so chaotic so quickly. Like, these are 3 grown-ass women, and I don't understand how things went so bad so quickly. Like, one of them gets violently ill, one of them almost drowns, one of them breaks their arm, you know, one of them shatters their ankle, one of them gets poison ivy, among so many other things. And then at one point, like, they have no cell reception. Like, they didn't have any cell reception, and when they finally got to a point where they may have, the phone was dead, so they weren't able to contact anybody to get help. They weren't able to really move after a while because they were so injured and ill. So, like, the one who was the healthiest out of all of them took off by herself near dark to go and try and find help, and then she gets, like, fucked up, and then is by herself. There's just so many different decisions that are made that I was very confused by, because I'm like, y'all are adults. Y'all are parents. Like, shouldn't you know a little bit better? Especially for people who have gone camping before. Like, this is a childhood thing that they did. And, like, it was needed because they all got their, like, emotional development out of the struggles and, you know, the hardships. But, like, it took it a little bit out of the realm of believability because they kept making poor decisions and then it just kept getting worse and worse. I think it does have the potential to be visualized in a way to where they just make it very, very comical, or they almost make it more of like a horror experience. Just like depending on what visual media, like if they were to make a visual adaptation of it, depending on what vibe tones they decide to embrace, I could see it doing so well in a variety of genres. Like, I think that was probably my hardest, like the hardest part about reading the book was being able to see and visualize the potential. It did just fall a little bit short in book form. Again, for myself, it's really hard to like try and review this book knowing full well that I am not the intended audience for it, and knowing that somebody who did fall in that intended demographic would like it a lot more than I did. So I definitely hope that this book finds that niche that it's aiming for. But even within that niche, obviously, I do have like thoughts and opinions. Oh, okay. While I am talking about thoughts and opinions, there's one particular part that was very, very difficult to read because there's a point, like, we have the character Sandra, and, you know, spoiler warning for part of the book, but, like, it's early on, so it's fine. So Sandra is in her sexless relationship, and at one point tries to crush, like, Viagra pills into her husband's drink so that way they can have sex. And I wouldn't have thought I'd need to express how fucked up that is, but because of how it was written, I think I need to. If you weren't aware, that is, one, attempted drugging. He didn't end up drinking it, so they didn't have sex, and, like, it didn't happen, but she tried. And the fact that she wanted to and that she tried is so concerning because it's attempted drugging. If he had drank it, she would have just flat out drugged him. And also, that's sexual assault. Her husband did not consent to taking the Viagra, did not want to have sex at the time. So, like, that's sexual assault. Very, very explicitly had it happened. It didn't, so you're on thin fucking ice. But that's very, very concerning and scary. The frustrating thing about it is it wasn't written to be like that. Like, that wasn't the intent that you were supposed to read out of it. And I definitely don't think it was written with harm in mind. But that's almost kind of worse, not being aware of how damaging and legitimately problematic that is. Like, it was written, I think, to be almost a comical element, and then also just to show the desperation that Sandra is feeling in her relationship, which is understandable and relatable to some people, but, like, not in that way. Like, that's not something that should be presented as an option or okay. Especially, okay, because, like, another element of the book, and particularly with Sandra's storyline, I think I had the most issue with her storyline and how it was handled, because there's also an element, like, she ends up cheating on her husband because she has this business relationship. She's, like, trying to sell a condo to some, like, wealthy man that they met on a vacation of theirs, and who she's been, like, kind of flirting with. You know, they've been having, like, a playful dynamic. So, like, they go to sign the paperwork, and he gives her a couple drinks, and, like, after these drinks, like, she agrees to have sex with him. So, like, the day after this all happens, she, like, blacked out for part of the night and wasn't entirely sure of everything that had happened. And, like, she just she knows that she cheated and she knows that something happened, but she didn't remember the entire night, which did not track for the amount of drinks she had. And, like, pretty much that whole setup felt very much like she had been drugged, but it's not brought up and it's not mentioned, like, this entire thing. And, like, they're trying to extort her, and then she goes on this trip and she's obsessing over it and thinking about it. And, like, at no point does she come to the realization that she may have been drugged. And then at, like, the very, very end of the book, like, at a couple chapters, like, it's mentioned that, like, a mysterious drug had shown up in some lab tests that she had gotten done. So it's asked, and it's like, oh, like, were you drugged? And she's just like, no, like, this was my, it had been my decision. You should still be concerned about the fact that, like, there was a mystery drug in your system that you did not put there. Like, and that whole aspect was very, very glossed over, because she was just like, no, like, I was unsatisfied, like, I wanted to cheat. And I'm like, it doesn't matter if you want to cheat. That's still not okay to be drugged. And then to not address it, to not acknowledge it and be like, oh my God. Because at the very least, she could have used that as, like, a way to fight the extortion, let alone, like, these people need to actually face justice for their actions. Like, ugh. The overall point of the book and the theme was definitely to find yourself and to be happy and satisfied with yourself, so that way, like, your overall life and everybody else in it can also be happy and satisfied, and, like, you don't have to put others above yourself always. You know, you are allowed to have that self-love and compassion for yourself. And I think that's a very, very important message. Like, the theme of the book, I love. And I think that a lot of people would benefit from reading. And I definitely see the benefit for the right demographic. That being said, I'm very, very disappointed that there was no murder. But anyways, thank you guys so much for watching. I had a blast hanging out with y'all. Peace.